I just heard something that absolutely blew my mind. Let's flip open the Bible and see if they're right. It actually says that the Bible has been lying this whole time. At least that's what they told me, and this verse seems to back them up, so it must be true, right? Wrong. So often people hear something about the Bible, and because someone said it, and then they look and there's one verse that they read and it appears to back up what the person said, then it must be true. There are two huge issues with people in understanding the Bible. The first, people simply don't read it. They read a verse, or they read one thing here or one thing there, and then just take that verse and run with it without actually reading the whole Bible, or the whole context at least, to see what that verse is saying. And the other person just takes whatever they hear and assume it's true without doing any research. So you've got people who don't read, and you've got people who don't research, and both lead to false understandings of the Bible. In this video, I'm going to react to a few different TikToks that supposedly debunk the Bible and prove how the Bible is lying, and we're going to show how they're wrong. Let's go. All right, let's jump into this. And again, we're going to react to these TikToks and then respond based on these two major things: not reading and not researching. This first one's from someone who claims to be a Christian and sounds pretty sincere that they just don't understand this in the Bible and they're confused. Let's see if we can help clear up the confusion.
Hey, look, Christians, look, and everybody, I'm sorry to have to do this, all right? And don't hate me for it. Really look at this for what it is, please, all right? Because something is not right, and I'm trying to shake us up so we realize the truth out of this. Look at this, please. By the way, I'm also a Christian, all right? So I'm speaking the truth from inside, not from outside. Tell me which one to believe, please. It says right here in Acts chapter 1, verse 18, that Judas bought a field with that 30 pieces of silver that he betrayed Jesus for. And when he bought that field, he went there and he fell headlong. I don't know what that is, but his body burst open and his intestines spilled out. It's really graphic. You can kind of picture it in your brain, right? This is the problem. When you go to Matthew 27, verse 3, it says that Judas was actually filled with a bunch of remorse, and he returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. I thought he bought a field with it. Right here in Matthew 27, verse 5, it's written that he threw the money into the temple, and then he left, and he went and he hung himself. He went and he hung himself. Now look, I need to understand, did this man die with his feet on the floor, or did he die with his feet in the air? Did he die because he hung himself, or did he die because he fell and burst with his intestines open? I don't know. And I want to understand right now, because it looks like the Bible is divided against the Bible, and it makes it seem like the kingdom of the Bible can't stand like that. Something has to be true. Anybody help me? All right. And don't crucify me. I just want to know.
So this is an example of simply not reading fully, and also not using some basic understanding and logic and thinking skills. So first, let's look at the not reading part. So he reads in Acts 1:18, where it says the field was purchased with the silver that Judas got for betraying Jesus. And it says it was purchased with that money. But then he goes and reads in Matthew 27, and it says that Judas returned the money. So the first issue he has is, how was the money used to purchase the field that Judas died in if Judas returned the money instead of using it to buy the field?
I'm glad you asked.
It's very simple to actually understand if you keep reading in Matthew 27. Again, this goes to that first point. People don't read. If you go back and read in Matthew 27, let's read the full passage for context, shall we? Let's start in verse 3. Then Judas, which had betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned in that I have betrayed the innocent blood. And they said, what is that to us? See thou to that. And he cast down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed, and went and hanged himself. And the chief priests took the silver pieces and said, it is not lawful for to put them into the treasury, because it is the price of blood. It was blood money. So they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in, wherefore that field was called the field of blood unto this day. In Acts chapter 1, verse 18, it says this, Now this man purchased a field with reward of iniquity, And falling headlong, he burst asunder in the midst, and all of his bowels gushed out. And it was known unto all the dwellers of Jerusalem, insomuch as that field is called in their proper tongue Akeldama, that is to say, the field of blood, the same name that was used in Matthew 27. So we know that the field that was purchased, according to Matthew 27, it wasn't purchased by Judas, it was purchased by the chief priests and the council at the temple. Judas did try to return the money, but they said, we can't use this money, it's blood money. We can't use this money to do anything with the temple service. They said, take the money and go. But he dropped the money, so they took his money. They still considered it Judas's money because they would not accept it back into the temple because it was blood money. So they just purchased the field and said, here, he won't do anything with it, we'll go purchase the field. But it was considered Judas's money because they gave it to Judas and it was blood money paid off for the betrayal. So this isn't a contradiction. He did try to return the money, but then they took the money and purchased the field in his name for him because it was his money, and that's where he ended up going to kill himself. Now there's another issue that is raised, and that is the issue of whether he hung himself or whether he fell headlong and burst open and his insides exploded out.
Good luck figuring that one out.
The answer is actually very simple. This isn't two separate accounts, it's just two perspectives of one account. Let me give you an example. If I'm walking down the sidewalk and I see on the road beside me a man crossing the street and a car hits him and he gets hit by the car, knocked to the ground, and dies, I would say he died because a car hit him. He died by being hit by a car. Now the paramedic who shows up and actually, does all the work on his body might say he died from internal bleeding, or he died from a collapsed lung, or he died from one of these other things. Now, we're talking about the same event, but I am giving a different perspective of the same event than the paramedic. And it's the same thing in this case. These are just two different perspectives, two different things of the same event. Judas did hang himself. He hung himself, and then at some point, either the branch that he used or the rope broke, and he fell and burst open. Now, I want to point out that the reason we know that he must have fallen from a high distance like that, like he was hanging from the side of a tree or something, is because your insides do not explode out of you by hitting the ground simply by tripping and falling or falling that way. So he fell. He had to have fallen from a great distance, which lines up perfectly from him being suspended in the air and falling, probably from the tree or the rope breaking. Now, not to be gruesome, what more than likely happened is that Judas actually died while hanging. He's hanging in the hot sun in Jerusalem. The bacteria in the body, as he dies and begins to decompose, the bacteria in the body would begin to eat away and break down the tissues and cells in his body. And this creates gas that builds up in his body, ultimately creating bloating. And what happened is, as he fell, as the branch broke or the rope broke and he fell, because he was bloated and the tissues of his body were now decomposing or dying, he hits the ground and explodes open. And that is what is being referred to in the book of Acts. So you don't actually have a contradiction here. It's just using critical thinking through the facts, and also reading the full story so you see who purchased the field and what happened. Reading is fundamental. Reading is key. Gotta read the whole story, not just pick out a few verses here and there. Let's look at another TikTok.
So I told a few people that the modern Bible was full of. Then somebody said, religion is subjective. You can't say that it's true or false. That's their faith. And I agree. But the Bible that you read is backwards. Check this out real quick, all right? Man shall not lay with man, for it is an abomination. Okay, but the German version says that man shall not lay with young boys as he does women, for it is an abomination. So how come in English it's man shall not lay with man, but everywhere else it's not? Well, that's because it is now. And it may be difficult to get your hands on, but if you can get your hands on Martin Luther's German Bible, the original text, Nabenschneider, I may have pronounced that wrong, boy molester is what that translates to in German. Now, homosexual was used for the first time in the English text Bible in 1943. And it strikes me odd that the Germans came up with the word homosexual and it didn't enter their text until 1983. Right here, German translation, 1983. It's the very first time homosexual appears in the Bible, in the German translation. Now let me tell you why. That's because a company called Biblica, the company that owns the NIV version of the Bible, paid for all of Germany's Bibles in 1983. Germany saw a quick decrease in their Christian numbers. They wanted their Christian numbers to come up higher, so they reached out to America to send them some Bibles. But Bibles are really expensive, and they couldn't pay for all of it at that time, so America said, don't worry, we'll pay for it, we'll send it out there. Good faith. They sent them their edited version, their anti-gay version, the one that fit their agenda. This is all fact, by the way. You can look it up. There are transcripts from when it was changed. So anybody who thinks being gay is against God, come kiss me about it.
This is a prime example of a situation where people do not research. So in this video, you can see that the person uses an article, and if you look at that article online, every single one of the talking points they have in this video come directly from that article, which tells me that they likely read the article, took it at face value, assumed that it was true, and went with it. And more than likely because it already fits with their preconceived bias on the topic.
Oh, is that a good way to do that?
Let's do a little bit of research and see what actually is the case. First, a lot of this argument hinges on what the German word used in Leviticus means. And I'm just going to be completely honest with you. It's a completely irrelevant argument. What matters isn't what the German word means. What matters is what the original word means in Hebrew, because the Old Testament, Leviticus specifically, was written in Hebrew. So it's what the Hebrew word means that matters, not the German word. Let me give you an example to illustrate what I'm saying. If I pick up a book written in another language and it has the word can, the word can in that language may mean something completely different than what the word in English means. So if I read the same word in English and I say, well, the English version of this book uses the word can and it has this or this in mind, that doesn't mean that the word in the original language meant that.
Right, obviously.
So we have to actually look at what the original word was, not what the German word is. With that being said, let's address what is said about this verse in German. Now first, let's read it in English. So the verse in English is Leviticus chapter 20, verse 13, and it says this: If a man also lie with mankind as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. Now notice what it says. It says, if a man lie with mankind as he does with a woman. That's how it's translated in English, at least in the King James Version. Now he said it might be hard to get your hands on Martin Luther's version of the German Bible. Apparently, he hasn't done enough research on the internet to realize that everything that you need is on the internet. So no, it's not difficult to get your hands on this. It's actually right here on the internet.
Have you heard of the World Wide Web?
So as you can see right here on the screen, this is from newchristianbiblestudy.org, and this has Luther's Bible on it. It's a Luther Bible from 1545. Now it is in German. Unless you know German, you're not going to read everything on the page. But you'll notice it has a listing of Old Testament books and New Testament books. And the words are in German. Now notice how the first 5 books of the Bible are written in German. In English, it's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. In this German Bible from Martin Luther, it's first, now I don't know how to pronounce this in German, so I'm just going to say Moses. It's transliterated Moses. The first Moses, second Moses, third Moses, fourth Moses, and fifth Moses. First 5 books of the Bible written by Moses, so that's why it's labeled that way. So Leviticus is the 3rd book of Moses, so we would click on 3 Moses, or 3 Mose, or however you say that in German. Now, we are looking for chapter 20. So right here, book 3 Mose, click the number 1 here, and let's go to chapter 20, and then verse 13. When jemand beim Naben schlaft. Now, again, I can't pronounce that. I'm butchering it, I am sure. But the 2 specific words that are highlighted in the video we just watched is Nabenschlacht.
What did you say? What did you just say?
Nabenschlacht, they say, means boy molester. No. First of all, let's deal with Schlacht. Schlaft in German does not mean molester. So whatever website he pulled that from is simply false. Let me prove it to you. So here is Cambridge Dictionary's German to English dictionary. And when we put in our word Schlaft here, it says schlafen is the verb, present tense schlaft, which is what we see in our verse. And this word simply means to sleep, to be asleep, to be fast asleep, to spend the night, to be asleep. That's the word. So this word does not mean molester, as in specifically a child molester. This word simply means to sleep. Now the key is the other word that is put with this, Nabben. Nabben, as you can see here in this screen, Nabben, or which is the singular version of Nabe or Knob. I'm again butchering the German pronunciation, but it means boy or guy. Down here you can see boy, a male child. So they're saying because it means boy or a male child, that must mean that this is talking about sleeping with a child. And that's why they're using the German version, because it's using that German word. Now, I do want to point out that he is correct that this word Nabben is the word used in Martin Luther's version of the German Bible. But I do want to point out, just for argument's sake here, I do want to point out that while it does mean boy or child, it also has a colloquial meaning of simply guy, as you can see right here on the screen. But let's put that aside and let's just say, for argument's sake, that they're saying it means boy. Before I jump to what the Hebrew word means to explain this and correct the information, let's just see how Martin Luther used this word in other places. So if we take the word Nabben and we come up here, there's an option to search this translation. This is that research I was telling you about. Let's put in Nabben and we will see all the places that this word is used. Now, I will admit there are many times this word is used in the passage when it is talking about a child, but there are some times when it's not. For example, right here in 2 Samuel 18:32, it uses the word Nabben, as you can see right here, and it is in reference to Absalom. Absalom is the son of David. If you actually go read 2 Samuel 18:32 and actually all of 2 Samuel 18, you find out that Absalom is fighting in a war, and Absalom is an adult here. Absalom was about 25 to 30 years old at the time of his death, and this is the story of his death, and yet it uses the word Nabben, boy, to talk about Absalom, who is 25 to 30 years old.
The plot thickens.
Another place we see this is in Genesis chapter 48. You can see it here, book of 1 Moses, chapter 48, verse 16. It uses the word Nabben. Now, this is talking about Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. You can go read Genesis 48 and you can see the story. And in Genesis 48, Jacob, or Israel, is giving a blessing to Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And it says that he was about to die. So Jacob was about to die when he gives this blessing to Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim and Manasseh were born before Jacob and Joseph's other brothers came to Egypt. It was before the famine even began in Egypt, several years. So this would be several years before Jacob and them came to Egypt. And in this passage, we find out from reading the scripture that Jacob was in Egypt for 17 years. So Ephraim and Manasseh were born several years before Jacob came to Egypt. And yet here we see that at 17 years later, after Jacob is in Egypt, they're getting blessed by Jacob. So this word Nabben is used to speak of Ephraim and Manasseh, and Ephraim and Manasseh would have been in their early 20s at this time, not children, in their early 20s. Here's another place that the word Nabben is used. It's in Ruth chapter 2, verse 5. You can see it right here on the screen. It uses the word Nabben. And this is a word that in the English is translated servant. And we know that this is an adult. This is a servant who was in charge or had leadership over all the other servants, all the other reapers who were reaping the harvest. So this was someone who was not only an adult, but adult enough to have a position of authority over others. And yet the word Nabben is used to describe them. Here we see in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 17, the word Nabben is used to speak of Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas. And it's describing Hophni and Phinehas working in the priesthood as priests. So we know because they are working in the priesthood as priests, they had to be at least 25 years old, because Numbers chapter 8 tells us that no one could work in the priesthood unless they had attained the age of 25. Therefore, Hophni and Phinehas are 25 years old at least, probably a little bit older than that, and yet they're still referred to as Nabin by Martin Luther. Here we see in 1 Samuel chapter 9 verse 3 that it speaks of Saul, King Saul, when he was going out to find his father's sheep, and this is where he gets anointed. It uses the word Nabin to describe him, and yet we know that he was about 30 years old when he got anointed. So this idea that the word Nabin means child and only means child in German is simply false. While yes, it does mean boy, the way it was being used by Martin Luther back in the 1500s clearly did not mean simply child, because if it did, he wouldn't use that term for all these other adults that is being described. So clearly the meaning of this word is way more nuanced than this article that this person read. Now, putting German aside for a moment, what really matters is the Hebrew. And in the Leviticus passage, the Hebrew word used is zakar. Zakar simply means male. It's the same word that's used in Genesis 1:27 when it says, male and female, he created them. Male and female, specifically addressing the genders. And when he's talking about created he, them, talking about Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were not created as children, they were created as adults. So he created males, and specifically talking about an adult male in that context. This word is used all throughout the Old Testament, speaking of males of all ages. It is used to speak of children at times. It is used to speak of adults at times. The word doesn't have an age association. It's just male, as in the male sex.
He-Man's so manly.
So the argument about the German word and all of that is complete trash and has nothing to do with what the verse actually says. That being said, the whole argument about the word homosexual being added in, the word homosexual didn't even exist in the context in which it's used today until the late 1800s. And even then, it took several decades past that to become a common usage word. And that's why it wasn't put into the English Bible until 1930, 1940, somewhere in there. Now, I will say, I don't think it's a great translation, because the way we use the word today in 2023, many times it's not used to describe the actual activity of homosexual behavior. It's used to speak of attraction and things like that. But the word, what's being talked about in Leviticus and in Romans and in all the other places that it's mentioned in Scripture, it's always talking about the behavior, the activity. So I don't necessarily know that it's a great English word to use, but that is beside the point. The Bible still condemns the activity, and that is what is being discussed in Leviticus. And this whole concept that it's molesting a child or has to do with a boy, completely false. I hope that cleared some things up for you. I was actually going to react to a few more of these, but this video is getting pretty long. So instead, I'll do a part 2 of this. So I hope you stick around. Click the subscribe button so you don't miss that video. And if anyone's interested, there are links down below to support the channel. Thanks for watching. And if you enjoy reactions like this, I actually reacted to some progressive Christian TikToks. That video is right here.